Listen, I want to talk about Nepal because it's interesting not only for the Nepalese, but for the rest of the world. You guys know how Gen Z's always on their phones? Gen Z always be's like, I want to be on my phone instead of doing things. Well, now, apparently, Gen Z's not only on their phones, but in Nepal, they are mass protesting. It is the world's first Gen Z protest. And you'd expect, when you see a Gen Z protest, that it'd have something to do with phones and probably something to do with anime. Well, one part is true. But before I go into what the Gen Z protest would actually look like, which is a lot less like this and a lot more like this, an actual uprising changing the fate of their nation, I need to give you a little bit of background because you probably aren't super aware on the context. This is Nepal. It is a small state in the Himalayas, kind of a buffer state between the two big countries and economies of China and India. And what's interesting about Nepal is that you might expect, being sandwiched between two bigger empires, that it would have been subsumed by one of them over the course of its history. You'd think it'd be part of a larger empire. Like, why is Nepal its own state? Why isn't it part of China or part of India? So if you go back, this is India in the years prior to the British takeover of India, when it was a group of smaller states. Nepal was still on its own. And then a few years later, after Britain essentially colonized India, Nepal was still on its own. Nepal was the only part that did not get taken over by Britain. Why was that? They fought a war. There was the Anglo-Nepalese War. And while Britain technically on paper won this war, it was so costly fighting the Nepalese in the mountains. The cost benefit of trying to keep it up and conquer the actual territory was so bad that Britain said, okay, you can keep your own state. You can just you're separate. You still have to respond to our authority, but you get to be your own country. So they were able to hold out against Britain at the height of British power, which is pretty incredible. So this is before Britain came in. I was like, well, what about before this? Because India wasn't always a series of smaller states. What about the Mughal Empire before that? So I went back even farther in time to the Mughal Empire, which is the last time India was like nearly fully united. And even then, they couldn't conquer the Himalayan states, aka modern Nepal. Even then, they tried, and the Himalayan states, modern Nepal, used the mountainous advantage. Again, technically kind of lost the war, but didn't lose their sovereign territory. And in between the Mughal Empire and the British conquering, also the other side of this map, China. Well, they wanted Nepal, and there was the Sino-Nepal War. Guess what happened again? China technically won yet again, but it was so costly they couldn't actually take the territory. And again, Nepal ended up keeping the territory. So 3 separate times much bigger empires have tried to conquer Nepal, and every time the mountains have allowed them to maintain their independence. And now it's been hundreds of years, they have been basically an independent territory. The history of Nepal is actually quite fascinating and pretty impressive. The proud nation of Nepal has refused to be conquered, but a different kind of war they have finally lost recently. And that is the war on poverty, the war on economics. Poverty and economics have basically won in Nepal. Over 20% of Nepal's 30 million people live in poverty. The unemployment rate among young people stood at more than 22%. Over 1 in 5 young people cannot find a job even when looking for them. Also interesting, the richest 10% earn more than 3 times the income of the poorest 40%. That made me laugh because that's not that bad. That's not that bad. Just for context, in America, the richest 10% earn more than 26 times the bottom 40%. But, you know, the bottom 40% have a higher overall than in Nepal. So now we're back to modern day with the Nepalese Gen Z protests that are going on right now. That gives you some context though, okay? Proud nation currently succumbing to a rising increase in poverty and unemployment. Now, if you were to guess, why would Gen Z most of all protest? Would it have something to do with their phones? Jokingly, yes. Part of it is, of course, the poverty. But what kicked it off is when they tried to take away the phones from Gen Z, because there was a social media ban that blocked Facebook, X, and YouTube, Reddit, Signal, Snapchat, and I guess LinkedIn, which is the first time someone has ever rioted because they can't access LinkedIn. let's say going into this year, youth unemployment very high, people upset. Additionally, people in Nepal, especially young people, are starting to notice there is a big wealth gap among young people who are connected to government figures. Rich politicians and their families are posting on social media absurd displays of wealth. This is an example I found from hashtag Nepo baby, which trended in Nepal. So they noticed that while they make only barely over $2,000 a year, some rich family members were posting images of them with Louis Vuitton Christmas trees. All the public fund and tax money are making their lifestyle luxurious. Meanwhile, poor citizens are working day and night for them. This stuff started to go viral. It started to get bigger and bigger. People were getting angrier and angrier as they noticed how much these Nepo babies were living large off of the public dime. This woman posted, this is in Nepalese, but I have the English here, working like a donkey every day in foreign land just so I can fund Nepali Nepo babies to build Louis Vuitton Christmas trees. And I can't even speak with our family. So this is an article from days ago before everything kicked off into high gear. Wealthy Nepo kids are a source of outrage. So this started to pick up and the government got scared because they were being criticized and their families being criticized over and over on social media. And it got bigger and bigger and bigger. And so suddenly the government had a reason to want to crack down on social media because they were being exposed for, again, using public goods to get their family wealthy. Thousands of videos started trending across Nepal's digital ecosystem. The contrast between elite privilege and everyday hardship struck a deep chord with Gen Z and quickly became a central narrative driving the movement. So now Gen Z's angry. And what's really interesting is that it may have just stayed as online anger. Again, the main thing that Gen Z in Nepal was doing to strike back against the oppressive Nepo babies in government is they were doing like mass unfollows. When social media was still up, it kind of contained their anger. They were posting TikToks and they were doing mass unfollows. But then the government had the very short-sighted and very stupid idea to try and shut down social media, which removed the very last outlet that Gen Z had to get the word out. So once they got rid of social media, posts like this started going around in the few areas people could still access. Guys, let's protest on 8th September in front of Parliament. Like, these posts started to go viral of people saying, hey, let's go in person. They started organizing in person instead of on social media. And suddenly the fight became very real. Suddenly the youth of Nepal were no longer just posting about being angry. They were physically very angry. And they wanted change because, again, they are living in poverty. They are seeing their wages not rise. They are seeing corruption from the government. And now they are organizing and acting for change. So the leader of Nepal, this prime minister here, Khadiga Prasad Oli, who has done 4 terms in a row and is, of course, you guessed it, 73, a classic boomer. Also the head of the Communist Party of Nepal, which for all the inequality and corruption is a little off message, has run Nepal for 4 years, and after the riots showed up at his front door, resigned in disgrace. He resigned in disgrace and fled. So now in the aftermath, there is nobody in power. Nobody has stepped up to take his position. Part of that was because Parliament was literally burning, and part of it was because in his first attempt to crack down on the student protests, he pushed the police towards violence and they killed 19 unarmed students. So now everyone's even angrier. Now they're even angrier. Additionally, they hoped they could get back control by rolling back the ban. After all the protests had taken off, everyone's like, well, okay, you can have social media back, Gen Z. It turns out that did nothing. It turns out it was way, way, way too late. So now they're asking not only for end of corruption and social media back, but now they want justice for people who died. They want a criminal investigation for use of deadly force against protesters. This is not just the death of 19 youths, it's murder. The government hands are stained with blood and they cannot escape accountability this time. Gen Z will not stop now. This protest is about more than just social media. It's about silencing our voices, and we won't let that happen. Now, again, what's interesting is we're seeing prime ministers fall all over the world. But in some nations, like France or Japan, it is done with a graceful stepping down with a vote because they still have some semblance of normality. But when the situation of poverty has gotten so bad as it has in Nepal, again, all governments are only a few steps away from this outright public violent anger. People are deeply, deeply upset at seeing their opportunities squandered away for the benefit of very few. It does feel very Fourth Turning-esque. Now, I don't want to act like, though, again, I have to be honest and realistic in this reporting here. This is happening live. Right now, as we speak, the situation in Nepal is chaotic. Student protests are sweeping the country. There is nobody stepping up to fill the power vacuum after the prime minister stepped down. And usually in the real world, what happens next can be very violent and very chaotic. I don't want to pretend like, oh, and now the story will end happily ever after. In human history, usually right after student protests lead to crazy change, like a general will step in and fill the power gap. Usually the military steps in and does a brutal crackdown. Like, a lot of things could go very wrong in Nepal. The likelihood that the student organizers are so organized that they have a realistic demands and can facilitate those in a positive change way, I'm hopeful for, but it's unlikely. The power vacuum will get filled. Whether it's done in a positive way or a negative way is entirely up to, how the Nepalese people handle it. Protesters are calling for accountability and reforms in governments, and if they get that, it will be great. But we'll have to follow up and see what happens next, because there is a likelihood that the military tries to seize control, or someone else. I have to say, I do admire the courage of the Gen Z protesters in Nepal to finally do something about what is a clearly broken system that has been letting them down so severely. What happens next, we'll have to wait and see. Thanks for watching.